Morning all. A very interesting game yesterday in round 3. Magnus Carlsen was playing white against Wely. So Magnus is rated phenomenally at 2861 at the moment. Wely 2679. Dutch GM Wely. So C4 for Magnus. And we get a transposition into a King's Indian actually after knight f6, knight c3. We get a King's Indian defence. One of my favourite defences myself as playing black. Bishop e2 as though mainline King's Indian is going to occur. But no, what we see now is Bishop g5. And for those interested in opening theory, this is the Averbakh variation named after Yuri Averbakh, Yuri Elovich Averbakh, who was a Soviet player. And as of 2012, according to Wiki, by the way, he's the oldest living chess grandmaster. So he's won things like the Moscow Championship in 1949, and he's come ahead of great players like Kulshnoy Timelov in some tournaments like 1954, the USSR Championship. A great player, but as far as opening legacies, this is one of his most important opening legacies. There's also a semi-Averbakh with bishop going just to e3, sort of g5, not going all the way, and it's called semi-Averbakh. But bishop g5, it causes some problems for black. And okay, black strikes with c5 as though there's an interest in playing for a kind of Benoni type structure. So we see d5 and now e6 as though this could really transpose literally into a Benoni structure. But after queen d2, okay, black takes on d5, and there's an interesting decision point here. White can elect for that Benoni type structure, giving black the queenside pawn majority and all the Benoni trump cards like e5, pressure on the e file and that e4 pawn. But there's another, perhaps you could argue, more boring way of playing this position, boring for black certainly, is to play e takes d5. I'm not sure about knight takes d5. I'm not sure that's as great here. In fact, that might fall victim to some sort of tactic. But e takes d5 is an interesting move. In fact, let's do a reference check, perhaps in the second pass actually. Let's keep a detailed analysis and reference checks in the second pass. So for the moment, e takes d5. Let's just observe that the pawn structure is symmetrical now for both sides. So both sides sharing the e file. What has black really got out of this to celebrate? It looks as though the f5 square for the bishop is nice, at least. In the structure with c takes d5, that would have been denied that bishop, and this is sometimes a problem. Piece. Okay, but here black can celebrate bishop f5 for whatever it does. Queen b6, a tricky move, putting pressure on b2 tactically. You might think, what's the idea? Black has, it seems, a very specific idea now in this position. Okay, after the knight f3, which looks natural, as though it's not going into anything too terrible, we see the move bishop f5 now. Okay, and there are some forcing moves available to black as a result of this position, involving the bishop coordinating the queen on b2. Black looks as though knight e4 is a potential dangerous forcing move to be able to recapture with the bishop and put a lot of annoying pressure on b2. And okay, it will be interesting to see how many times this has occurred before this position. But Magnus is very calm here about this potential threat that black has, and you might find it quite astonishing in some respects that it's not a routine move he plays at all here. He plays like castling. He plays actually knight h4. Okay, if the bishop drops back, okay, bells out, that's interesting, rather than try the forcing sequence. Black has castled. You might think it's totally legitimate that black's completed development to some extent, well, apart from these two pieces, and it's white's king that's still in the centre. So can black get away with an active plan to even try and win material here as black? Well, it's a little bit controversial, perhaps, as we'll see. Knight e4 is played, so direct forcing move. White has to respond here is virtually, if he moves the queen, there's going to be a lot of damage to his structure. He has to take. After bishop takes e4, the bishop is eyeing b1. So there's no rook b1 to defend b2. There's no b3 because that loses the rook. So white's going to have to sacrifice this b2 pawn in some way, it seems. Okay, and Magnus does so. He just targets this bishop. He just plays the move f3, letting black win a pawn. Black plays now the forcing move queen takes b2. So black's just snatched a pawn here. Okay, so what's Magnus's idea? Well, we see just the calm rook c1, not minding the exchange of queens and going into an endgame. The bishop hasn't got too many squares. c2's been denied it. The rook and queen are denying c2. Where else can the bishop move apart from back to f5? Now on f5 it moves back, but there's structural damage incurred. And although white's a pawn down here, he has the bishop pair and potential threats of bishop e7 on the cards, as well as just taking and rook b1 to take b7. So there's a lot of dynamic compensation as well. It's one of those positions, superficially, technically, you might think, well, black's just taken a pawn here by force with forcing moves. Forcing moves are not always good. The resulting situation here, there are weaknesses. d6, b7, white's got the bishop pair. The evaluation overrides the stunts which might have occurred as part of the forcing sequences. Black carried out a technical operation, winning that pawn, but what is he left with here? Okay, it's Magnus's move, and it's Magnus's turn to start some forcing moves, and he forcibly takes the queens off, and now exposes the problem with b7, rook b1. But it seems black has time to try and get an extra move of this check. No problem. King d1. The king might be useful on the queen side to guard the b file in this situation. Okay, rook e8. Rather than accept bishop e7, trying to defend this one, rook e8 defends against bishop e7 and ties the king down from going to c2. But the b7 pawn is sacrificed. Black wants to try and use that b file. We see rook takes b7, and the knight can only really go to a6 now, but it stops from going to b4 with the move a3. Can black use that b file as some sort of compensation? We see rook ab8. Magnus just takes. After knight takes b8. Now bishop d3 means the king is now free to go to c2 and it's attacking f5. Okay, so we see knight d7. Is Magnus keen to straight away take this pawn on f5? It looks a little bit dangerous because of knight e5 attacking c4 and there'll be no bishop d3. So very calmly the move king c2, forcing the bishop away. Bishop d4. And now just taking over that b file for the moment. Rook b1, threatening the highly dangerous rook b7. Black stops this and still keeps a discouraging look on c4. If bishop takes f5, knight takes c4. But white can now target again bishop. Bishop can attack d6 here. Black defends with bishop e5, but that goes into a pin. Rook e1. Okay, after king g7, now bishop g3 threatens f4, winning material. Black's next move is designed against that. With rook e7, he can at least play now against f4, bishop f6 to defend the rook. This is played, f4, bishop f6. Magnus just takes off the rooks. Okay, and again, you know, he can't try and win a pawn, although he's got his pawn back on b7. Can he win f5? Well, he plays bishop e1. These bishops look very dangerous on these diagonals. For example, this one, and maybe a5 is going to be useful just to take this to really threaten f5. Just eliminate this, which is holding down this bishop on d3. Perhaps, but after h5, no, actually there's another idea now. Just g3, and after bishop f6, let the knight stay on the board. White just protects the c4 pawn, now really threatening bishop f5. Okay, we see the move king g6, and it looks like a nasty pin on the pawn. How can that be exploited? Magnus's next move exploits that pin with h3. It's going to be playing now g4, to which black is absolutely helpless against, it seems. In this position, Van Wely thought his position was so bad, even in this simplified endgame, he just resigns here. It was a very, very quick win actually. Magnus had hardly taken any time on his clock. He was just very, very pleased with the opening advantage, and temporarily a pawn down, accepting that, but getting his pawn back, and then starting to win a pawn by force here. g4 next. Black resigned. He thought his position was that bad. Let's check from an engine valuation perspective this position here. So knight c8, black's going to be a pawn down here after g4 with the two bishops. Knight e7, trying to defend. Okay, and you might think it's not so clear cut now if the knight's defending. Hang on a sec, bishop a5, trying to target d6 here. So this is why it's going to be a pawn down. This is hopeless now with this threat of bishop c7. If king g7, g5, bishop goes back to d4, bishop c7 now, and here black's overloaded. These two weaknesses are starting to overload black. Pawn is surely now dropping off by force, which is the case. Huge advantage, and that's quite easy to win from there. But yeah, black's got these weaknesses which are just you could argue they're chronic weaknesses in this position. If king g7 just offering f5 here, if he's just taking here and then just retreating the bishop back, will give 2-to-1 pawn majority, still with the bishop pair. So let's imagine this scenario, bishop g3, or the king can even come into the position quite aggressively. Bishop g3 is f5 now for d6, targeting. The king can come in offering a3 as an example, f5. Let's go with this. King coming in. It looks as though this is going to be a dangerous passed pawn if d6 drops off. Okay, this kind of scenario, d6 is now dropping off, surely, at some point. And now it starts to be very clear that white will be winning this kind of scenario. So okay, it wasn't immediately clear that black was losing a pawn because it has knight e7, but these infiltrations, it seems, on the queen's side here are very dangerous for black, even if black does hold up the f5 pawn. Okay, so in this position, after the quiet move h3, black resigned. Okay, let's go back and look technically and do reference checks on this game. So the Averbakh variation, very interesting variation. So here we see d5, e6. Now reference check on e6. I think this is an absolutely standard move in this position to head for this Benoni type structure. So here e6 is there's another move though. Nope, there's another move which is even more popular than the e6 in this position. With 1249 games, h6 has been played by Kasparov, Gustinov, Van Wely before. Van Wely as well has played h6 before. e6 675 times. So it's a little bit of a surprise maybe, e6. Okay, the percentage is quite good for white. The percentage score on h6 is 59.1% though. Against e6 it's slightly less at 55.5. So e6, and in the game here we saw queen d2, which is the most popular move. After e takes d5, which is the most popular move by far, queen a5 much rarer, about 18 games. E takes d5 is 389 games. Now the choice here, now this is quite fascinating. that actually white players, the majority of them in this database of high level games, they actually prefer E4 takes D5 here rather than C4 takes D5. 338 games with E takes D5, 45 games with C takes D5. Serwan Benjamin Kuzubov played C takes D5 before. Bariev, Kaidanov, Minov, Galkov all played E takes D5 before as some of the best players there. So we see in this game E takes D5, and in the game we see now the slightly unusual Queen B6 played 55 times in my database here. Rook E8 is more common with 209 games, A6 53 games, and then it goes significantly down, only 6 games with Bishop F5. So we see Queen B6, a rarer bird. Larsen, Dyakov, Riccardi has played this before. Rook E8 has been played by Kamsky, Glek, Najdorf, Danjwik. So Rook E8 is the more popular move here, not Queen B6. Okay, is this prematurely a forcing sequence? Knight F3, and now Bishop F5, the most popular follow-up from black. And this Knight H4 has been played 24 times before. This is not new. Kaidanov, Yakovich, Zakharevich have all played Knight H4 here, inviting black for this forcing sequence. And in fact, the score is 66.7%. So this is not necessarily such an original concept. Maybe Magnus has seen all this before as part of his opening preparation. It's a very, very good score percentage to play Knight H4 here, inviting black for this forcing sequence with Knight E4. So 20 games on this path with move F3, 19, that's the follow-up. The Putin, Zakharevich played this before. F3, it's all been seen before. Black taking on B2, Rook AC1, so the rook's out of harm's way. And in this position, okay, in this position we saw Bishop F5, Bishop going to F5. The percentages are really, really good for white, whatever black does here. Taking the queen off, Bishop F5, 1 game in that. H6, there's 6 games in that. 83% success for white. It's not a great position, it seems. So black played Bishop F5, letting white do the exchanging of queens after knight takes F5. G takes F5. White does the exchange of queens. And there's one stem game still in this, 1973. And believe it or not, there's Metanov playing black in 1973, won from this position with black. That's a curiosity. Hold on a sec. What's happened here? Where was actually the beaten path in this scenario? This was 19 games up till here. The most common thing for black to do here was actually taking on D2, 11 games. Bishop F5, we're only going to that Nesmetanov game here. 6 games with H6, so Bishop F5 kind of the rare bird. So Queen takes D2 is interesting. Bishop F5 is such a rare bird. Let's quickly just examine this other game. Bookman against Nesmetanov. How on earth did Nesmetanov win from here? Out of interest, because he's one of my favourite players. Let's check it out. So he got this position, and completely different style of game. Black seems to have counterplay on C4. Okay. Black somehow just got counterplay in this game and destroyed white's centre a little bit. Fascinating. And these passed pawns look pretty bad. In the centre. So how on earth, actually just go to the critical moment there, how on earth did black get counterplay from such a similar game to this Magnus Carlsen game to start off with? He played the move Bishop F5, So white took on b2, but now played, for some reason, well, he didn't perhaps like the check, but rook b1 is Magnus's choice. By playing rook c2 instead of rook b1, that looks like a major inaccuracy. So the best thing is to allow the check and for the king to help support c4. In this game, the king's not playing such an active role as in the Magnus Carlsen game. The king stuck on e1 here. White just trying to win more simply the f5 pawn, but the rook and king are just not as great as in the Magnus Carlsen game here. If we look at this, he wins f5, but all of black's pieces are doing better compared to white's pieces in the Magnus Carlsen game. Here, it seems black's got a very nice position. Remarkable how one move there makes a huge amount of difference to the whole outcome of the game. Just for those interested. Okay, so let's close that. And so in the Magnus Carlsen game we saw, remarkably, now will an engine pick up this nuance to play rook b1? Yes, it gives it as slightly better than rook c2, inviting the check. Rook b1 is a strong move here. This looks to refute the whole black line. If white's getting this bishop pair and getting the pawn back, it looks to be highly advantageous for white with rook b1. Let the king play an active role to help potentially support c4 here, or even invade on the queen side later via the a4 square. So bishop d3 you might think is an option as well as rook takes b7. Okay, but it seems Magnus is playing the more accurate move at this depth. That rook takes b7 straight off the bat is tempting as well. If we go with bishop d3 b6, defending that, maybe it's not as fun for white as in the game continuation. Okay, he wins f5, but king g7 maybe to try and play f6 even at some point. And okay, this is still better for white, but maybe this is even stronger, just taking on b7 here. Okay, ruling the knight out of too many possibilities, stopping the knight going to b4. Is that really important here? It seems to be it's a very good idea to do that, just to stop that counterplay, but apparently give black some play on the b file. But after takes, no, black's not interested in rook takes b8. I think just king c2 here is strong, or even bishop d3 just to stop the use of the b1 square and take f5. That doesn't look great though to allow a rook on the 7th. It looks as though black might have some potential play here. The way Magnus is playing it, he's not really I don't think he would have, well, in the game it was irrelevant. Black took with the knight, so taking with the rook, how do we really extinguish the play here? If king c2, there's actually there may be rook b2, that's the problem, or bishop e5 reserving rook b2. So if that bishop has to go back now to protect b2, okay, this isn't so hot. So that's interesting that here rook takes b8 wasn't actually maybe it was given serious consideration, but the way to extinguish black's counterplay might be best with bishop d3 in fact, and let the rook come to the 7th. It seems at this depth anyway bishop d3 might be the move here, not king c2. You might also wonder about this position here. This isn't good for black. That d6 is left as a weakness. The knight's still out of the game, so bishop f4 is going to be strong. Probably bishop f4 here. This d pawn's going to be strong here, and the knight's ruled out of the game with the bishop. So okay, let's go back. So rook takes b8. We see knight takes b8. Bishop d3. Knight d7. So the knight wants to get active, but the king is coming to the rescue of the c pawn soon. White's using that b file. No entry point for the rook. Rook b7 seems to be the major threat here now. So that's parried. Okay, and we see bishop f4 targeting that weakness. How else does black defend d6 apart from bishop e5 here? If he plays rook d8, interesting. You'd think the natural rook e1 would be good here, maybe, to try and take over that file, but maybe that's harmless because of king f8 here, or even it's not even a big deal, or it might be. But here apparently there's an even more incisive move, rook b5. So what's the threat of rook b5? Okay, rook a5. Just go for this. Is one of the threats, I think. So okay, so black wasn't content to play rook d8. He goes into this pin. White could even just take here on e5, it seems. Let's have a look at this. The move a4. Let's have a look at this. Knight takes a4. If this knight and bishop scenario favours white, it seems good for white. Is it enough for a win? Possibly. It's quite a passive knight, and d6 is still weak, and it's going to be attacked with rook d7 at some point here. So okay, let's go back. So rook e1, we see king g7. The bishop just slips back, threatening now f4, major threat. That's parried with rook e7. What else is there to parry that? If king f8 to defend the rook against f4, is this any good for black? Magnus could just take here, and king b3, now threatening bishop takes f5. Well, the pawn's going to drop off. White's going to be better here, basically. So okay, we see rook e7 and Magnus exchanging off rooks forcibly. Bishop e1, h5. What was the actual threat of h5? Was it actually threatening anything? Maybe it was just trying to suppress the pawns potentially from playing g3. But it doesn't look as though that was the intention. Okay, white plays g3 anyway, just fixing basically this h pawn. Bishop f6, and just king b3 now means white's just slowly playing this position. He's holding up c4, supporting c4 to just win f5 without any issue. Now this move h3, very, very powerful. If black's this is a token attempt to save the pawn, so black's going to be a pawn down now. Eventually, if he even if he tries his best to defend f5, as we saw in the game continuation, but he actually resigned here. So this does require some explanation that the knight can try and come to the rescue. So he resigned here, but knight c8, g4, knight e7, and there's just infiltration on the queen side here. So bishop a5, or maybe even king a4 is strong. Or would that be a blunder here? Bishop d4. Okay, apparently it's good anyway. This position, it's still good. The advantage is not going anywhere, surely. Most incisively, bishop a5 would have the threat of bishop c7, just to target d6 here, and black starting to fall to bits, as we saw. Okay, very interesting game. Very interesting that there's an important branch, an important novelty over the old Nesmetanov game. That rook b1 instead of rook c2 makes a huge amount of difference. Little nuances can change the whole evaluation of a variation. Comments or questions on YouTube? Thanks very much.